is about to bring you into a good land. Make sure you don't forget God, your God.
Hello, welcome back to Teaching Through the Bible. So we're going to finally get into Deuteronomy today. We had kind of an overview last time. Now we're going to get into those first few chapters. But before we do that, just a few real quick notes. Just a few different verses here. Chapter 2, verse 30 talks about this person, their heart is hardened by Yahweh God. I've addressed that in Exodus. I'll try to send a link below to when I talked about that with Pharaoh, back all the way back in Exodus. Verse 14 in chapter 3, it has this guy named Jair. He has these villages, names them Hawoth Jair. Just so you know, that's just the Hebrew word for cities. So cities of Jair. Not the most creative name, but that's what that means. If that just helps you understand that more. Verse 20 in chapter 3, I've already made the case that the tribes that were east of the Jordan River, that they should have gone over the river to the originally promised land. But here we have a case in chapter 3 here that doesn't look too negatively on it. That doesn't mean that it was a good thing for them, but I made my case that it was not a good thing, but just wanted to be fair and point out in chapter 3 here, it does talk about this land that God has given them. So that's all for the notes. As we get into chapter 1, I just want to start by reading the first few verses. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness, in the Arabah opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the people of Israel, according to all that Yahweh had given him in commandment to them. After he had defeated Sihon, the king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth, and in Edrei. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to explain this law. So, that right there, he just, from there on, starts talking. A lot of Deuteronomy is going to be a speech by Moses. As I said in the last video, some people actually categorize, they break down the structure of this book of the Bible by Moses' speeches. And so, when we read these first few verses, this is what we call the preamble. So, we have this outline here. Again, there's different outlines you might have, but this is one way to look at it. And the preamble is those first 5 verses. And that is a standard part of the kind of treatise that people had at the time that this was written, when they left Egypt. And the preamble, this is basically saying, who is it that is initiating this covenant treaty? And in this case, it's Yahweh. It could sound like, as you read through it, it could sound like it's Moses. It's talking about Moses, right? He's the one that's about to speak. He's the one that's going to speak to the people. And then he begins to in verse 6. But it says in verse 3, he spoke to the people of Israel according to all that Yahweh had given him in commandment to them. So the person initiating this is Yahweh, and so that's what we're getting out of the preamble. That's the main thing. There's other stuff in here, but in those verses, that's kind of the big point. Is Yahweh is the one that is initiating this covenant with his people, and so that's the first 5 verses. That's the preamble, and the rest of chapters 1 through 4 is historical prologue. So that in a standard covenant treaty of that time, what that would be is, here's what I've already done for you. Here's why you should listen to me. That sort of thing. Now, that is definitely part of what's going on here as well. And we see a few different things in these first few chapters. Now, first of all, as we look at verse 6, where it starts that historical prologue, it's this narrative that's here's kind of where we started and how we got here, right? And from Mount Sinai all the way to the point they're at now. When you look at that, that's really telling most of the book of Numbers. It's kind of taking all of the book of Numbers, or a large part of it. You see chapter 10 is where they leave from Mount Sinai. So you're taking all this from Numbers and squishing it into a very little space here. And so that's what's being summarized, most of the book of Numbers. And when you see that here, if we're looking at this first chapter, what are we supposed to take out of this? Well, we see that God is faithful and just to his people, despite, this is really important, despite their failures. So he is faithful to them, and they're not faithful to him. So it's not reciprocal, but he's still caring for them. He's still looking after them, despite all their failures. And so you see that throughout this historical prologue, throughout this narrative here, of them going from place to place to place, them not listening to him, not following what he says, him judging them, because he's a just God, but also still providing for them, still caring for them. They're still around. He could have just wiped them all out. He didn't do that. There are still people there at this time to hear Moses, because God has been caring, he has been loving, he has been looking after them, and he's protected them from many other tribes, many other people who are after them. So we see that in these first few chapters in this narrative, that Moses is telling to the people, reminding them of what God has done for them. And as we look here, this is ultimately to encourage all of Israel. This encouraging, people will probably have heard, be strong and courageous from the beginning of the book of Joshua. But it's also the end of Joshua. It's also the beginning here. It's also the end of Deuteronomy here. It's all over in this section of Scripture. Be strong and courageous. Some variation of that. God is encouraging them in that. But he's not just encouraging them kind of generically or spur of the moment. It's not one of those trust me bro kind of moments. If somebody else at school that you met one time says, hey, me and some friends are going to go jump off a bridge over here, it's going to be great, no one's going to get hurt, promise, so come on with us. How much confidence do you have in that? Versus maybe your best friend, who's a reasonable person, a trustworthy person, you've known him for your whole life, and cares about you, says, hey, I got this plan, I know it sounds crazy, but it's going to work out, and maybe you're still a little apprehensive, but there's a difference between those two, right? And God is one who they have a relationship with, who they know already has got them through so many things. And he's reminding them here in this historical prologue, look how much he's already provided for them. The number of times he's already looked out for them, already cared for them, already defended them against enemies. And so when he says, hey, now you're going to go into this land and you're going to have to fight an enemy, guess what? This isn't the first time kind of thing. This is not, I'm promised something in the future. This is, I'm continuing this promise that I've already shown you to be true in the past. So here God is encouraging them. So that's part of what's going on here. We see that this is going to be something where actually we're going to see a flip on this theme of the hearts melting. So before, and it reminds us here at the beginning here in Deuteronomy that when the last generation in the book of Numbers, they got there, God said, all right, go on in, and they said, no thanks, hard pass, because it says their hearts melted. So this is a kind of an illustration that's saying they were terrified. They were terrified of what they heard was over there because of those 10 spies that Moses had sent that brought back a bad report that said, you can't do it. Joshua and Caleb said, actually, God's with us, so we can do it. But the other 10 said, no, you can't. And they said, we believe those guys. And they followed them. They were terrified. They said, you know what? Actually, here's a great plan. Let's go back to Egypt and become slaves again. That was their plan, instead of following God. So here, God's reminding them of that. And we will see later on, particularly in Joshua, how the inhabitants of the land, their hearts are going to melt. They will say, our hearts melt because of you Israelites coming. God's basically throwing up the reverse Uno card on the whole situation. So that's going to be a key thing later on. So, we see that kind of being planted here with Moses reminding them of what the previous generation, how they had handled the situation with the inhabitants of the land, and it's going to be reversed for this generation. So that's really cool. But we also see that as they're listening to Moses, as he's going through, here's all the things that have happened. When he talks to them about they didn't attack Edom. They didn't attack Ammon, Moab. So we see this, in these first few chapters. Chapter 2, over here, it says that they were told not to attack any of those places. Now, why is it that they couldn't attack any of those places? What is the reason? Because they're told to attack other places. So why is it that they're not attacking Moab, attacking Ammon, attacking Edom? There's a reason for this, and God gives the reason. Actually, there's a couple reasons. Now, they are going to judge other nations, and remember, this is why they're attacking. Okay, so God's giving them this land, but it's a dual purpose. It's giving them the land, but it's also bringing judgment on evil people, on Sihon and Og, who were on the east side of the Jordan River. They attacked Israel, and Israel defeated them. They're going to cross the river. They're going to defeat many people on the other side. But certain people, these certain groups, they go around, right? They're not engaging in war with them. And God says it's because he's already given them that land. He's given the Edomites that land. There were other people there before. The Edomites came and took it over. Same with Moab. And this can also encourage his people. I've already done this before, and now I'm going to help you all do this again. Now you all get your land. They got their land, and you all get your land. Don't touch their land. I've got land for you, and you can be encouraged that it will work out because it's already worked out before for them. So that's one reason. That's one part of why. But there's another part which has to do with the family relationship. Edom is all from Esau. Esau and Jacob. Remember those guys from Genesis? Esau is the father of the nation of Edom, and Jacob, whose name is also Israel, is the father of the nation of Israel. So those two guys, these are brother nations, basically. Now, a little more distantly related are Ammon and Moab, who are the sons/grandsons of Lot. And that probably sounds a little weird, a little off. I'll put a link to the video below about that whole situation. But Lot was Abraham's nephew. And so Abraham, who was the grandfather of Jacob. So it's a more distant relation, but they're related through Abraham. And so you have this familiar relation, and God cares about that. Covenants, we'll see, and we have seen already, there's a big, strong family aspect to that. And so we see that actually even in these chapters here, we see that family aspect. When not only when God says, hey, don't fight these people who are related to you, he says some other things as well. So we see chapter 4, verse 9. it tells us that in verse 9, only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen. And this is chapter 4, verse 9. This is talking to the Israelites. Unless they depart from your heart all the days of your life, make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before Yahweh your God at Horeb, Yahweh said to me, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, and so on and so forth. Well, here, you may have noticed, it says these people were there, right? And maybe some of them were as little kids, but really the only people who were at least adults there at that time were Joshua and Caleb, and everyone else has died in the wilderness now as punishment for rejecting God. And here, this is maybe some of them were little kids when this happened, but many of them were not actually there physically, were not born yet. But God is counting them all as one, because it's a family thing. So even though, one guy here wasn't physically there, but his dad was there, and so it's all counted as one thing. Like, y'all were there, meaning your family. They're counted and part of that family. And so you're seeing the family there being a really important part of how the covenant works. One person not actually literally there, but their family connection is there. We also see something else very important in what I just read, starting in verse 9, it says, keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart. We're about to read a whole bunch of stuff about the law. But it's not just physical rules. It's not just the external. Just like Jesus isn't only in the New Testament, the importance of what's in the inside is not only in the New Testament. In fact, we see Jesus here as well, because we're going to see that Moses, back in chapter 3, he said he's not going to be able to enter the land because of something he did that was wrong, and God saying you cannot enter the promised land. Well, guess what? The last thing that has to happen before God's people can enter paradise, their promised land, is that their leader, their covenant mediator, that he has to die. And of course, it was Jesus, our covenant mediator, that needed to die for us to be able to enter the truest promised land, for us to be able to be part of that. So we see Jesus there. We also see the truth that it's not just external. External matters. It matters in the New Testament too. But there's not what's kind of falsely characterized as the Old Testament being an external thing and the New Testament being about the internal, about the heart. No, the heart matters here too. We see that here. We see that plenty anywhere else in the Old Testament as well. So that's something else we'll see. And as we move on into chapter 5, we'll see that as well when we look at the 10 Commandments. And if you want to know why I tend to do quotes around it, we'll get to that next time. Thank you for watching that video. I hope that it helped you learn a little bit more about the Bible today. And if you'd like to continue to learn more about the Bible, then we have plenty of other videos on the channel. And if this has been helpful for you, then you can always let me know by subscribing to the channel. And hopefully I'll be able to continue to help you learn even more about God's Word. Thanks.